Okay, welcome everybody to week 14 and the final week of our studies for the season. As promised, we're going to do study or deed, which is more important, the study of Torah or deed. Before we get into that, one other pretty important point in the fundamentals of Judaism is the issue of gratitude. And you know it's a Jewish issue because there's a Jewish term for it, hakarat hatov. And it's very important to express gratitude in everything that we do. You'll find, according to the latest psychology, that people who do express gratitude regularly are healthier, are better off. And among the many things that we have in Judaism that have later been discovered is the issue of gratitude. So I just want to take a moment and offer gratitude, first of all, to Rabbi Benjamin Blech, who is the author of this wonderful book that we've been studying. We're about to finish the first half of it. I want to express appreciation to Ken, who was willing to host tonight's class. When we were kicked out of this room, we decided not to do it on the first floor.
Wow, you're missing all the vodka and...
All the vodka. The after party is at Ken's place.
Good job, Ken.
I want to offer some gratitude to Steve, who not only helps me prepare for the class, but participates in the class, and also heads up is the assistant of our audiovisual team for remote classes for the Teams meeting. And of course, I want to express appreciation to Jay for, I know I'm shocked at how many people have been watching this on YouTube, but we wouldn't be watching it on YouTube if not for Jay's excellent audio-visual work. And of course, Pam, who heads up our refreshments committee. We eat well before and after the class. I want to express appreciation to Jody. If not for Jody, this class wouldn't even be happening. This is the only regular class in Park City. We are just a couple hundred feet away from the Orange Bubble, from a ski lift. And we have been studying for 13 weeks in a row. And without Jody's organization, this would not have happened. It gives me the opportunity to share some very positive news. I want to thank all of the students, first of all, because obviously without the students, we've had some regulars who have been here all winter, and we have some new people here today. Everyone has been participating, and it's been really great to have all the engagement, but we've also been learning in the merit of a recovery for our friend Aviva Galia Basima, and just this week, we got an update that her latest scan showed that they couldn't even see the tumor. So, as her husband David put it, we won the inning. We haven't won the game yet. So please keep Aviva Galia Basima in our prayers. But we've gotten some positive news, so that's really, really good to hear. So really gratitude to everybody because everyone has been participating. And I wouldn't want to do this without all this engagement. And what we've been doing is we've been studying Torah. And we've talked about the idea that from the very beginning that all the commandments are created equal. We can't say this is a big one or this is a little one. We can't prioritize them. We can't say this is not an important one because I don't think it's important. I don't do that one. But then at the same time, we've broken them down. We've had the 10 commandments, which aren't really commandments. They're principles. And of those 10, the 5 between man and God and the 5 between man and man are actually all parallel. So there are 5 big principles. We learned a couple weeks ago when we had a lot of our non-Jewish friends in class that there are 7 laws for non-Jews. There are 3 commandments that you're better to die for than to commit. So there are all these categories which help us prioritize, but there are no little ones and no big ones, even though there are different categories that help us when there's a conflict. And what we're going to study tonight is a question that is brought up in the Talmud, which is better? And it's almost a philosophical question that other religions and theologies have talked about. Is study more important than deed? And kind of in a lead up really to the discussion we're going to have tonight, those of you that were here in week, 4 or 5, I told the story about my experience in the subway in New York City, where I saw this very piously dressed man who was learning the Talmud on a busy, crowded subway. And I thought, wow, I'm just standing here listening to some music in my earpods, and this man is studying a very complex text. Wow, that's great. I admire him. And as the busy train came to a stop, I noticed a pregnant woman walked. She could have been an immigrant woman, pregnant, walked into the crowded train. And obviously, I was taught the first thing you do is you get up and you give her your seat. Although make sure she's pregnant. But either way, no, you should. This man who was studying his Talmud did not look up, and he did not offer his seat to her. And it bothered me, and I was troubled by that, and my own reaction was, what's the point of learning all that if you're just going to sit there and have your nose in the book? How does all this studying affect you as a person? And really, that's really the topic of the class tonight. And we know that in Judaism, studying is fundamental. It is a central tenet of Judaism. And going all the way back to the Talmud, they asked this question. And it was a Talmud that we studied earlier in the season when we talked about the sins that you shouldn't commit, that it's better to die for them. And it was a story that was told over, and it said in the Talmud that they were studying in the attic of Nietzsche's house in Lod. And we asked the question, why does it say in the Talmud that they were studying in the attic? Well, the text that we were studying was, do you die or transgress? Which do you do? And the reason it told us that they were in the attic is because they were being persecuted. They were studying and hiding in the attic. And for them, the question of do you die or transgress was not a theological, hypothetical question. They were at risk of being killed for studying. And that's why they were in the attic. And we come back to our friends who were studying in the attic in Lod. And the question was raised before them, is study greater or practice? Rabbi Tarfon answered saying, practice is greater. And as we know in the Talmud, they argue over things. Rabbi Akiva answered saying, study is greater, for it leads to practice. So you've got Rabbi Tarfon saying practice, and you've got Rabbi Akiva saying study. And the answer, and the Talmud says, then they all answered and said, study is greater, for it leads to action. That's in the Talmud of Kedushin. And the fact that they were studying in the attic in Lod, in the very place that they had come out about martyrdom, on those 3 rare instances where it's better to die than to transgress, now they were discussing the opposite. Not about what to die for, but about what to live for. Is it all about studying, or is it all about action? And they had this debate. And there were 2 sides to the debate. And Rabbi Tarfon was about practice, and Rabbi Akiva was saying study because it leads to practice. And the answer, who won the debate? Which side? Rabbi Akiva won, because the answer was study. But it's very rare, if you study the Talmud, usually it says, Rabbi Tarfon said this, Rabbi Akiva said that, and we go according to Rabbi Akiva. But the text doesn't say that. And again, I apologize for reading, but I want to read the text. The text says, then they all answered and said, study is greater, for it leads to action. They didn't say, as they normally would, the law is like Rabbi Akiva. And you have to ask, just like when we study the Bible and we parse each word, when the Talmud says something that's a little out of character, out of the syntax of the normal language, you have to ask why. And the answer, Rabbi Blech writes, is it didn't say Rabbi Akiva was right. It said specifically, study is greater, for it leads to action. So study in and of itself is not the ideal. Study leads to action, and action is important. So basically the answer was an amalgam of the 2 points of view. Otherwise it would have just said, yeah, Rabbi Akiva's right, study's the most important thing, and that guy on the subway who didn't take his head out of the Talmud would have been right. But we learned from that Talmud, I wonder what he was learning. I wonder if he was learning that Talmud at the moment. But the answer is, study is greater only because it leads to action. The title that I gave this class, so the book, Understanding Judaism, the Basics of Deed and Creed, but in December when we had a title for this class, I called it Judaism, a call to action, because it's not only about studying. We can study all day long, but it won't do any good if that doesn't, as the Talmud says, if it doesn't translate into action. In fact, it says in the Ethics of Our Fathers, not study is of main import, but the deed. If that is the case, how could the Talmud in Kedushin have placed primacy on study itself? The two do not contradict each other. One speaks of means, the other of ends. Torah study is given its lofty significance because without it, one would not know how to carry out the mitzvahs properly. So it's a mitzvah to go visit someone in the hospital. I say, oh, I'm going to go visit, I am busy, it's late, it's 10 o'clock at night, I'm going to go visit this person in the hospital when they should be resting. So we know that you should visit someone in the hospital, but if you don't have common sense, we know from the Jewish law, if you study it, that you shouldn't visit them when they should be resting. If someone, God forbid, has incontinence and you're going to visit them and it might embarrass them, it's better not to visit them. And the Talmud, the Jewish law teaches all of these ideas. So if we just say, I'm going to visit my friend in the hospital, I'm going to do a good deed, and we don't learn how to do it, then what's the point of doing the good deed if you don't if you're doing good deeds because that's what God told you to do, but you don't study it, then it doesn't do any good. So the idea is that they are interdependent, that studying is worthless on its own, and deed can't be done properly unless we study, and it's not always obvious. So I was thinking about that, and I thought we would do a little thought experiment. So I need everyone to think about how they want to answer this question. We'll go around the room. So Elon Musk is not Jewish. People sometimes think Elon, it's a Jewish name, he's rich, he must be Jewish. He's not Jewish. Let's just play a game for a moment. Say Elon Musk were Jewish. And he decided to take the entire Talmud, the entire Bible, the entire Mishnah, the entire Halacha, and put it onto a little chip. It could be, there is so much to learn. People learn all their lives and they don't get it all. But we could get the whole Talmud onto a little chip. And what if we had the opportunity to implant that chip in our brain, which I would love to do, because studying is hard work. Would I be skipping out on the mitzvah of studying because now I have it all in my head? Or would I be more empowered to do the right thing? Does anyone, like if you had the opportunity to do that?
More useful.
It's more useful what?
It's all there. You could work with it instead of studying
Right.
for the next 50 years. You know?
Anybody else with a thought?
For
No.
You would do it. You wouldn't do it. Why not,
You can
Susan?
have a bookcase full of all the sparring.
Yeah, but then you got to read them and study them. And
But
Just
the
because
whole
it's in
point
your
of
brain,
studying
you have to
is
be
to
able
have
to-
action, and if it allows you to do more action, if the chip is in your brain, that's better.
I
If
think
you
Ken,
can
who is a
access
man of action, has a chip in his body that will allow him to ski more than 3.5 million vertical feet a year.
For sure.
Yeah.
60,000 in a day, 64.
So Susan, why
I'm
not?
saying that, just because it's in your brain doesn't mean you can always access it.
Just because it's in your brain does not mean you could always access it.
So
We have to have the passcode.
Passcode.
that, or, the
Okay, now you have a 3-digit passcode. What's the 3-digit passcode?
613.
613. Although if you ask Chabad, they would say 770. It's 613. You have to access it.
I mean,
What
just
good is
because
it?
you have information doesn't mean that you're going to use it properly.
Steve,
But that's the same thing if
We're
you're
gonna-
studying.
we're gonna get
Just
some
because you're
online-
studying, it doesn't mean you're gonna.
Correct.
this is a good debate.
That's correct.
Steve, jump in.
I think the question is, do you have the benefit of toiling in it? Do you have the advantage of, well, this rabbi said that rabbi said this, and understanding it so you can bring it to deed? And I think if you just know the information, you may bypass that portion of the active learning process. Like if you know homework in school, if you don't do homework as a kid, you don't really get it. You learned it, but you forget it. You didn't incorporate it.
Right.
Great. So I think that's
And like also in Pirkei Avot, where it says, find yourself a rabbi. You have to have somebody that can
well. The
help.
Pirkei Avot is outdated. You didn't have the chip yet.
Right. The chip.
No.
Well, so the Pirkei Avot is in the chip.
Ah, good.
But the whole point, one of the Mishnah is you have to find yourself a teacher, because you can have the information, you can read it, but your interpretation of it may not be correct.
Beautiful.
Are
Good
you-
answers.
Are you really supposed to like do something like that to your body? I mean, aren't we?
That's fighting the hypothetical a little bit, but there are issues about damaging your body. You of course can have you could have a pig's valve inserted into your heart. Pig's not kosher. How can you? Well, if it saves your life, you can do it, because we learned of the 613 commandments, there are 3 that you should die for. All the other 610 you should live for. So if somehow having a pig's valve will be the way to save your life, you can have that. Similarly, if I don't know, if you're mentally deficient and you can't learn the whole thing, you could argue that the chip, which won't harm you, it won't shorten your life. Maybe you shouldn't be the first one to do it. Maybe that can be done. I'm not issuing a halachic opinion. It's a valid point.
There you just said it. If you physically don't have the wherewithal, if you're deficient, if you have dementia, if you have an injury, whatever, what good is having, you can have a library of books. If you can't read, if you can't comprehend what you're reading, so what?
But maybe
That's a point.
maybe
It doesn't
have
have to be either or, it might just aid you. I mean, that's a
Well,
crutch.
he's saying,
Yeah,
if you have this in your head, then you're going to be able to just do the deed and not study.
So after tonight's class, when Elon Musk calls me, I'm going to tell him there were differing opinions, but I think they were all good and valid opinions. Susan, I think you're onto something, and we're going to actually get into it. We have 3 chapters tonight. We just finished the first chapter, and in the second chapter, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this idea. But I think those are all on point. Even though there are divergent views, I think they're all right. I think there's a good case to be made that you should have it implanted so that you can do the deeds. But Steve and Susan, I think, are 100% on point that what good is it if you don't toil in it, if you don't really ingrain it in yourself and you understand it better when you learn it. And my hypothetical, which is imperfect, is really to get you thinking about these ideas. Who knows if a chip actually works and is like accessible as if you experienced it? Who knows?
But if it's in you, why do you have to work at it?
So we have different understandings of what implanting a chip in your brain will do. Is like, do you have full access to it?
The person who has the chip implanted may seek out other rabbis after
Right.
having all that information there to discuss the ramifications
gain
of
more
everything.
traction too.
Or he may not
Go
use it
above.
at
Yes.
all. May not use it at all.
May not use it all.
Well,
I can
there-
snowboard, but in the summertime I can't.
Right.
So
All,
Not
I
using
think
that
they're all
test.
valid points. I don't think we need to come up with the right answer, but thinking about it, toiling in it, I think helps us understand these different viewpoints differently. And we're going to come back to this idea in a few minutes. But first, as we get into the next chapter, it's called the 3 crowns. And in Judaism, there are 3 crowns to the religion. And we're still trying to understand if study is in a class by itself. There is, Hilchot Talmud, the laws of Talmud Torah, Hilchot Talmud Torah, there is no mitzvah amongst all the mitzvos, which is the equivalent of the study of Torah. So clearly it stands on its own in some way. But rather, the study of Torah is opposite all mitzvot, for study leads to action, therefore study precedes action in every place. And it uses the word opposite. In Hebrew, the word is keneged. It's opposite, but it's almost a mirror or reflection kind of opposite. Not opposite as in opposed, but they kind of are part of each other in a way. They're the same reflection, but it's just the other side of the coin. And he says that's why the scholar is so admired in Jewish life. Torah study is also the ultimate measure of aristocracy amongst our people. That aristocracy is democratic, since it is open to any Jew who wishes to join it. He says a crown may be real or symbolic. Some people may even be wearing a crown this weekend as we celebrate Purim. Right? You'd be like the king Ahasuerus, you wear a crown. Maimonides, analyzing a passage of Ethics of Our Fathers, elaborates upon the crowns that we have. We have 3 crowns. He says, with 3 crowns were the Jewish people crowned. The crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of kingship. So we know that priesthood, which is passed down from generation to generation, descendants of Aaron. Aaron was given was the Kohen, the priest, and his son was a priest, and their son is a priest, and that's the way it works. A king, we know, we studied earlier in the year that David, King David, that even the Messiah will descend from him. Interestingly, David comes from Ruth, who was a convert. But only a king in Judaism can only be a descendant of David. It passes through David from Ruth. And a priest, a Kohen, can only come from Aaron. So if you are a priest, you're a descendant of Aaron. You're on the father's side. There's a joke. A guy goes to his rabbi, wealthy man. Not necessarily a learned man, but a wealthy man goes to his rabbi. He says, Rabbi, I want to be a Kohen. I want to be a Kohen so badly, I will dedicate the Aron Kodesh where you keep the Torah. $10,000. And the rabbi is like, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. Can't do it. It's not how it works. The guy is stewing mad. Because usually in his life, money would buy him things. $10,000 wasn't enough. He comes back a couple weeks later. He says, Rabbi, I really want to be a Kohen. I know you have a leaky roof at the shul, and I know you need to put in a new roof. It could be upwards of $100,000. If you make me a Kohen, I'll pay for it. And the rabbi says, let me consult the books. Let me see if I can find a way to do this. And the rabbi comes back to him. He's like, I really need that roof. If you'll do the Aron Kodesh and the roof, I'll make you a Kohen. He says, okay, we'll do it. We have a deal. The rabbi says, but I have to ask you a question. Why do you want to be a Kohen, a priest, so badly? You're willing to spend $10,000, you're willing to spend $110,000 to be a Kohen. He says, Rabbi, it's very important to me. You see, my father was a Kohen, my grandfather was a Kohen, so I wanted to be a Kohen. So priesthood is a crown of service. It's serving in the temple. It comes with a lot of responsibilities. And heredity ensures that you can be a priest. Or that if you're not a priest, you can't become a priest even for under $10,000, unless you have that rabbi. Heredity ensures the performance of certain tasks. Even as it honors, it places demand. And in Hebrew, the word kavod is an honor. Somebody gets called up to the Torah, it is a kibud, it is an honor. But in Hebrew, the word kavod means respect, but it also means heavy. It comes with a burden. Judaism does not content itself with the two crowns, priesthood and kingship, that are inaccessible to the majority of Jews. There must be a crown open to all. It is the crown of the Torah, and our sages have taught us that it deserves the highest praise. The crown of the Torah is greater than the two others. In no other culture can a common person aspire to be a king. Among Jews, any youngster can hope to become someone greater than a king, because the kingship of learning the Torah, the crown of learning the Torah, is greater than a king. Upon whom is the honor bestowed? Hereditary positions do carry certain privileges. Nonetheless, our sages have said a bastard who is a scholar takes priest over not only a priest, but a high priest who is an ignoramus. A bastard, a mamzer, may be born with seeming unrectifiable deficiencies. There is no way in which he can undo the tragedy associated with his sinful birth. Yet, if he drinks from the waters of the Torah and absorbs the word of God, then the poorest boy from the smallest village with the meanest background must be revered among our people more than the king or the high priest. Can there be a greater democratic ideal than that? It is accessible to everybody. But Maimonides and Jewish law are careful to qualify the emphasis on Torah study. We are taught in the Hilchot Talmud Torah, if one had before him, and this goes back to what we learned in the first class when you have a conflict between different priorities, if one had before him the performance of a mitzvah as well as the study of Torah, what should you do? Now, we learned earlier about the pious fool who was praying to God at the beach and somebody was drowning in the ocean. Help me, save me. And the guy praying by the ocean, he's like, I'm praying. I'm not allowed to interrupt my prayer. And the guy drowns. That's called a pious fool. Because the man needed him. God didn't need him. The man needed him. So what happens when there's a conflict between performing a mitzvah, helping out someone, standing up for the pregnant woman in the subway, helping a drowning person, giving charity, whatever it may be? How do we deal with that conflict? Because we know that Torah study is elevated. It's the highest crown. Yet at the same time, we've learned already in previous classes that deed is most important, that you should stop doing a commandment related to you and God if there's a commandment between man and man, because man needs you. What do we do? So the Talmud says, the Hilchot Talmud Torah says, that if it is possible for the mitzvah to be done through others, let him not cease his study. But if this is not the case, if nobody else can do it, then let him perform the mitzvah and only subsequently return to his studies. Study takes preference only if the righteous deed will be done. But we know the dangers of a community in which intellectualism is admired to an extreme. Right? Nazi Germany was a very intellectually advanced, culturally advanced society. And we know that when you put intellectualism first and alone on a pedestal, it could lead to bad outcomes. So the Hasidic movement came along and said, we want to look at things a little bit differently. And we talked earlier about the different forms of learning. There's the Talmud and the Mishnah, and we have more informal ways of storytellers. The Maggid of Dubno, who told these stories, and he was famous for telling stories, and they said to him, how do you know how to tell stories so perfectly? You have a parable for everything. How do you know how to do that? And he says, I've got a parable. So that was a story of a boy who was in the forest, and he was shooting arrows, and he was hitting every target. Not only hitting the target, a young man, but he was hitting the bullseye of every target. This is the parable that the Maggid of Dubno is telling. How do you come up with a perfect analogy? And he tells a story about the boy who hits the target every time, and the man comes up to him and says, how is it possible that you hit every target in the bullseye? And the boy says, it's simple. First I shoot the arrow, then I paint the target. So this guy knew how to tell a story that was relevant to each thing. So we've got these stories. There was a renowned rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, who was one of the founder of the Hasidic movement. And there's a story of Yaakov Yosef of Polnoi. This renowned Rebbe had met the Baal Shem Tov and asked, they say you are an expert at storytelling. Perhaps you will favor me with one of your tales. And he said, sure, I'll tell you a story. I'll have to tell you a story that happened. And it's a story about two men who lived in the same building. One man was very wealthy. He led a life of privilege. And every morning he would wake up and he would go to synagogue and he would pray slowly. After synagogue, he would study Torah until about noon. And then he would take a leisurely walk home from the synagogue. Later in the day, he would come home from the synagogue and he would spend his day in the service of God. His neighbor was not so fortunate, even though they lived in the same building. His neighbor was a laborer. He worked very hard. And he had to wake up early in the morning and go to work to feed his family. He would stay at work and he would finally come home. And while he was walking home, he would pass the very wealthy man who was sauntering home. And he was, I didn't get to go to synagogue. I couldn't go to synagogue. I had to work. I had to feed my family. I didn't have a choice. And the very learned, wealthy man would kind of look down upon him and smirk. Oh, you didn't even go to synagogue this morning. Poor man working all day. Look how dirty you are. And the poor man, when they passed each other, the poor man would look at him and say, this man was in synagogue, he was studying all day. He felt badly. In his heart, he cried that my life doesn't allow me to do these things. And he groaned. And the time came when each of these men, even the wealthy man, passed away. And when it came time for their judgment, The wealthy man kind of went in there pretty confident. He goes to synagogue early every morning, he studies all afternoon, and he felt pretty confident when he was being judged. And the heavenly tribunal asked him to give an accounting of his deeds. What have you done with the days of your years? And he said, I am thankful, replied the scholar with a firm voice, in which could be detected more than a little pride, that all my days I served my Creator, studying much Torah and praying with a pure heart. But, commented the heavenly accuser, he always mocked his neighbor, the poor worker, when they would meet near the synagogue. The voice on high was heard, bring the scales. And on one side they put all the Torah that he had learned and all the prayers that he had prayed, and on the other side they put that faint smirk which hovered over his lips each day when he met his neighbor. Lo and behold, the weight of the smirk turned the scale to guilty. After the case of the scholar was complete, they brought before the heavenly court the poor laborer. What have you done with your life? Asked the voice from on high. All my life I have had to work hard in order to provide for my wife and children. I didn't have the time to pray with the congregation at the proper time. I didn't have the leisure to study much Torah, for there are hungry mouths at home to feed, answered the laborer in shame and grief. But, commented the heavenly advocate, each day when he met his neighbor, the scholar, there issued from the depths of his soul a groan. He felt that he had not fulfilled his duty to the Lord. Again, the scales were brought, and the weight of the groan of the poor worker turned the scale to innocent. Study alone may not be sufficient to open the doors of the kingdom of heaven. It may only be idealized as a means to a greater end. So we could put things on the scale, and the way we think we weigh them is totally off. The scholar who would get up early and go to synagogue, to me is like the man in the subway who was studying all day, but it didn't lead to action. It didn't get him to stand up when the pregnant woman walked. He didn't even look out of his book. And the point of this studying is to look out of your book. We learned in the Talmud that the whole point of studying is because it leads to action. And if study doesn't lead to action, then it doesn't do you any good. So who has to study? Everybody has to study. Well, what if you're, someone who was cut out for studying? And what if you're somebody else who maybe isn't blessed with great intellectual capacity? It doesn't seem very fair. We just said that studying Torah was the ultimate democracy. We all had a chance at it. So the idea is, there's a phrase taught in the Talmud called kavita itim la Torah, setting aside time for the study of Torah. Within the precise wording of that question, did you set aside time to learn? Within the precise wording of that question rests a fascinating response to a problem some have posed concerning the fairness of this mitzvah. That we're all born with different abilities. We all have different strengths. You might be a brilliant scholar and you study, and you might not really be so brilliant. But you still have an obligation to set aside time to study. I said earlier that Judaism has a lot of principles that were later discovered by society. And we're about to do one. What's the most common sign, motivational sign that you would see in a gym where you're lifting weights? Scale. No pain, no gain, right? No pain, no gain. Some people agree with that, some don't. The Mishnah in the Ethics of Our Fathers teaches, in accord with the pain and this is teaching from the Ethics of Our Fathers, in accord with the pain is the gain. It comes from the Ethics of Our Fathers, no pain, no gain. So, to the student who once cried that no matter how much he studied, he could not seem to remember, and his efforts were therefore pointless, the renowned teacher, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who lived in the 1800s, responded, where did you ever hear a mitzvah which demanded that you become a great scholar? The mitzvah is only that you study Torah. So too, at the end of days, we are not asked how much of the Torah we memorized or how many novel interpretations we're able to create. The question is simply, did you set aside time for the study of Torah? So it's, again, consistent with that democratization of the aristocracy, that anybody can reach out to the Torah and study it. You don't have to be a brilliant scholar. And as we learned, you can be a poor person who doesn't always have time to pray or to learn the Torah. But if your heart is in the right place and you feel bad for that and you aspire to do what you can, then that has a very heavy credit. And in fact, there's another Hasidic story of a poor shepherd who wept bitter tears because he did not know how to pray. He could not read the words in the prayer book and felt incapable of properly approaching the Almighty. In his grief, all he found himself capable of doing was to read the letters individually. He was not educated. All he knew was how to read the letters. Plaintively, he cried out, Aleph, Bet, and all the Hebrew letters, those that he remembered. Then, with total sincerity of his soul, he said to God, quote, I cannot read the words. Instead, I offer you the letters. You know how to put them together properly. I beg of you to please make of them words pleasing to you. He went to synagogue, and all he knew was Aleph, Beis, Gimel. He said, that's all I know. You figure it out, God. I'm here. I don't know any better. And when they asked, how would that impact things, a Rebbe who inquired as to how that would play out, God will answer the petitions of his people because of the beauty and sincerity expressed by the prayer of the shepherd. Judged merely by content, the shepherd's prayer was surely not the most powerful one. Yet the strength of its conviction and the sincerity of its enthusiasm outweighed by far all of the verbal offerings of the Jewish people. Had you been studying in yeshiva all your life and prayed every day and had become a cantor who knew how to sing it exactly perfectly, but you weren't really focused on it, you weren't paying attention, you came to synagogue, you kind of just went through it and said it by rote, that doesn't help you that much. But if all you know is how to say Aleph, Beis, Gimel, and you have that sincerity, God knows how to put it together. The Hasidic movement righted the imbalance of a world that failed to remember the dictum, in accord with the pain is the gain. Of course, the great scholar was to be respected, admired, emulated, but one never forgot the profound insight of the tale by Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polnoi, where the poor man and the wealthy man cross paths. The scales of heaven weigh the smirk and the groan more than they do the number of texts committed to memory of the novel insights produced by God-given genius. So we talked about everyone has to study. Even if you're not a brilliant scholar, you still have to study. You have to set aside time. You have to put in the effort, no pain, no gain. The question is, when should you do it? When do you have to study? So fortunately, we have another story from Maimonides, who teaches. Perhaps you will say, until I will gather sufficient money will I turn and study. Until I acquire what I need, I will remove myself then from my occupation. Once I make a living and I'm comfortable and I could be that wealthy man, then I'll study. But make your Torah study fixed, set aside a time to study, and your work incidental, and do not say, when I shall have leisure, I shall study, lest you never have leisure. It is written in the Torah, for it is not in the heavens, nor is it across the seas. It is not in the heavens, nor in the arrogant is it to be found, nor amongst those who travel across the seas. Therefore, our sages have said, Maimonides right, one who engages overmuch in business transaction will not become wise, and our sages have commanded, diminish preoccupation with business and be preoccupied with study. Okay, well that's fair of them to say. But if you say someday I'll do it, you may never have that opportunity. There's a famous story, we've quoted great Torah scholars, Maimonides, the Maggid of Dubno, the Baal Shem Tov. So now we're going to quote Tolstoy. Imagine that in a Torah class, we're quoting Tolstoy. So he tells a story of a nobleman, very wealthy man. He's got all of his peasants working in the field for him. He says, you know what I'm going to do? I want to feel good about myself. I'm going to pick out one of these poor people and tell him he could have some land. I'm going to toy with him a bit. We're going to play a game. He goes to the man. He says, when the sun comes up, you can start walking. And as far as you go, as long as you come back before the sun goes down to this very spot where you started, you can have all of that land. And the poor man, he didn't even have a Garmin to track his walk. But he said, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go as far as I can. And when it gets to midday, I'm going to circle back. And I'm going to have a lot of land and I'll become wealthy. And the feudal lord said to him, if you don't make it back to this spot, you get nothing. Go as far as you want. But when the sun goes down, if you're not standing in this very spot and you don't close that loop, you get nothing. So, of course, he goes out and he goes on his walk early in the morning. Getting close to midday. Oh, this is the time that I said I got to start coming back now. He goes, I know I could be wealthy, but if I just go a little further, I could become very wealthy. I could feed my children. I could feed my grandchildren. My family will be wealthy for many generations if I just go a little further. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change my plan. I know the sun is going down. I was supposed to start turning around now and close that loop. But I'm going to go another half hour. I'm going to go a little further. And then what I'll do is I'll run back to close the loop. If I don't come back, I don't get anything. So he goes on and he goes on further. And he goes, okay, I really better go back now. Otherwise, I get nothing if I don't hit back. So he starts running back late in the day, and he's tired because he's been walking all day as fast as he could. Now he's got to run. And the sun is going down, and his heart is beating faster. His feet are getting tired. And his wife comes, sees him. Goes, honey, I have a question for you. And he's out of breath. He says, not now. Tomorrow I'll help you. Tomorrow. Right now, leave me alone. I got to get back. He's panting. And his son comes up. Daddy, I have a question for you. Oh, not now. No. I'll help you tomorrow. He runs and he runs. And he could barely run any further. And the sun is setting. And his wife and his son are what's going on? Tomorrow you're going to help me. You always say that. He finally makes it as the sun goes down, and he does hit the spot. And the feudal lord looks at him, and he's got this big, giant smile on his face, and in that moment, he drops dead. And the feudal lord says, you will get 6 feet by 2 feet. That's all you need. And that's Tolstoy's story. I don't think I need to spend too much of our limited time to explain the point of that and how it relates to the fact that, we may say I'll study when I have leisure time, but Tolstoy explains that one for us. These were the words of Hillel the elder, and do not say, when I shall have the opportunity, I shall study, lest you never have the opportunity. So we're getting really close to the end. We haven't done any of that gematria that we do, any of the word games where we add up the numerical value of the letters to come out with something creepy. But we do have a word game. Like we've played word jumble, we've played all sorts of word games. So in just over a month from now, we have a big Jewish holiday coming up. Who knows what it is? Passover. If I said to you, what is the one food because it's always about food. What's the one thing about Passover that we do?
Charos.
Matzah. Charos is good, matzah better. That's the essence of it. So Rabbi Yoshaya in the Talmud explains the symbolism of matzah. In Hebrew, mem, tzaddik, vav, tet. Matzot. Does that sound like any other words you know?
Matzah.
Mitzvah. Matzah sounds like mitzvah. Matzot, mitzvot. They are the same letters. In Hebrew, matzot is identical to the word mitzvot. The two are identical because matzot contain a message crucial to the performance of mitzvot. Same word. Matzah is an unleavened bread. So it's flour and water. What's unique about matzah, though? How do you have to cook it?
Unleavened.
Unleavened. 18 minutes. Oh, it's getting good, isn't it?
You're correct.
Matzah is unleavened bread. It is the opposite of chametz, the forbidden food on Passover. Yet the ingredients are both exactly the same. Chametz, which is so strictly forbidden that if anyone who eats it on Passover is punished with karet, excision, you're cut off. Chametz is nothing other than matzah, just a little bit later. Same thing, same recipe. The only difference is how long you let it sit there. The villain is time. The difference between what is mitzvah and sin is having allowed 18 minutes to go by. 18 is the gematria, the numeric value for chai, life. Okay, so we are going to do some gematria. The numerics, that each letter has a value, and that doesn't come to prove anything, but we can get deeper understanding from it. Disregarding the matzah and letting it turn to leaven. Those 18 minutes turn matzot, into chametz. Same ingredients, but the matzah, the thing of the main point of the holiday, becomes a sin. The only difference is the passage of time.
How much time?
So we don't eat
18,
leavened. We don't eat leavened bread. So you roll out the dough. You've got 18 minutes from the time you mix the flour and the water, where it might begin to rise, even if you don't add yeast. In the 18th minute and 1 second, that matzah becomes chametz, and we can't eat it on Passover. We can't even own it on Passover. If it cooks for 17 minutes and 59 seconds, it hasn't leavened yet, it hasn't risen yet, and then you can eat it. And not only can you eat it, you have to eat it on Passover, at least on the first night of Passover during the Seder. You have to eat a certain amount of matzah. You don't have to eat it the rest of the holiday, you just can't eat bread or leavened things.
They keep track of this time.
They would keep track. I think it was the German Jews who were very precise looking at their clocks.
So Rolex.
The Swiss Jews.
Not the Italians. Or would be the Italians.
So it seems very simple. What's more important, deed or creed? We did that whole Torah, studying Torah or doing deeds, and we learned that, and we put Torah on a pedestal. It's a crown. It's bigger than being a king. It's bigger than being a priest. It's bigger than being the high priest. But do not forsake the world. Torah study as means to an end is not viewed as an escape from responsibility. Maimonides adds one last major stricture. Anyone who presumes in his heart that he will occupy himself in Torah and do no work, supporting himself from charity. Behold, and these are the words of one of the greatest Torah scholars of all time, Maimonides. If you study Torah all your life and you rely on charity and you do no work, behold, and I'm quoting, behold, this person has desecrated the divine name and shamed the Torah, as well as extinguished the light of religion, and caused evil to come to himself, and has removed his life from the world to come. That is powerful stuff from Maimonides. Don't study in yeshiva all day long. We were born into a world where we've learned in previous classes that it's a commandment to drink wine, but elevate it, to ski, but ski with people with disabilities and help them, or recognize the beauty of the world, to paint and enjoy, but to do what you do and elevate it, to engage in the world. God created the world and left it for us to perfect. God didn't complete it. We have a mission, and that mission is not studying Torah only. And if our sages have said, anyone who derives benefit from the words of Torah, in terms of making money, removes his life from the world. And they have further commanded and said, do not make the words of Torah a crown with which to be glorified, nor a spade with which to dig. And further they have commanded and said, love work and hate rulership. It's like a political treatise from Maimonides. And all Torah which does not have with it work its end will be negated, and it will lead to sin. And the end of that person will be that he will come to rob his fellow man. This is from the Hilchot Talmud Torah. Maimonides could not have described his personal philosophy of life better. Tradition has it that from Moses, the son of Amram, to Moses, Maimonides, son of Maimon, there arose none like Moses. So he was like Moses. His name was Moses, the son of Maimon, which is Maimonides. Nevertheless, Maimonides, who was a brilliant Torah scholar, made his living from the practice of medicine. He used his Torah study not as an excuse to run away from life, but rather as a way to ennoble everything else that he did. It says in Ethics of Our Fathers, great is the study of Torah together with the way of the world. I learned this book at Yeshiva University, Understanding Judaism, the Basics of Deed and Creed, and the motto for Yeshiva University, anybody? Torah Umada. So it's not Torah. Mada is, how would you translate it? Knowledge of the world. Torah Umada. So the Torah comes first, but it's not alone. And that's the message of Maimonides, is that you can't, we put it on the pedestal. It is different than every other mitzvah, but it has to lead to action. But don't make the mistake of being the guy with the book in the subway. You have to be involved in the world around you. You have to bring that Torah to other people. You have to bring your way of life to others. And you have to engage in the world. You have to earn a living. Like Maimonides, one of the greatest Torah scholars, says you have to earn a living. Judaism believes in study and in work. Adam lived in paradise, but even in paradise, he had a task to perform, to work in the Garden of Eden and to maintain it. He was a gardener. The Sabbath law, which teaches us the concept of a day of rest, is prefaced with the words, 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work. And the reason and rest on the seventh. And the reason we do that is because God created the world in 6 days, and we want to reflect God and rest on the seventh day. And similarly, we can't just pay attention to the fact that God rested on the seventh day. Like, that's like a lazy thing to do. Oh, God, I'm going to be like God, I'm going to rest. You got to read the whole thing. First, you create the world. First, you partner with God to create the world, to engage with the world, to do things. 3 crowns were created for the Jewish people. Priests and kings were given their marks of royalty at birth. Every Jew can and must strive for the greatest crown. The democracy of our faith demands we all struggle to be aristocrats of Torah. So we began 14 weeks ago studying that in Judaism is primarily a religion of deed, not creed. That is why we chose first to analyze the deed system of our faith, a faith more concerned with practical consequences than conceptual theories. Its vocabulary is primarily that of halacha, of the Jewish law, rather than the catechism of belief, rather than about just what are our beliefs. So several possibilities exist for dividing Jewish law. The division suggests the existence of certain priorities, the 10 Commandments, which are big principles, the 3 which you die for, the 610 that you live for, the 7 that are not a result of the revelation, but the result of creation, the fact that you're human. If you're not Jewish, you still have these obligations simply because you're holy, because you're created in the image of God, even if you're not Jewish. Negative commandments, unlike positive laws, which contain no reference to different rewards, expressed their severity of punishment, the degrees of divine displeasure. Judaism doesn't actually desire capital punishment to be carried out. We learned about that. The threats of the Bible are meant to teach us the various levels of evil implicit in various sins. So as we went along, we studied if there's a conflict between the two, how do you deal with it? Which one is more important? They're all equal, but if they conflict, how do you respond to someone needs you to save them? We have all these different gradations, even though they're all equal. To hasten that, so the 7 laws are meant not only for the Jews, but for all people. God hasn't given up on the rest of the world. They're just not doing what we did at Sinai, where we agreed to do them and then to listen. Non-Jews who right now don't have an obligation for the Torah will join in the universal symphony of praise to God someday, and that day is envisioned in that Messianic era. To hasten that day and to live by Torah means we must study the Torah. Talmud Torah may be one of the mitzvah, maybe the one mitzvah that is in a class by itself. Torah study is the greatest because it leads to deed. And with that, here on a 53-degree day in the end of March, we conclude an awesome 14 weeks. And the study is never complete. The name of the book, Understanding Judaism, the Basics of Deed and Creed. We have completed, congratulations to everyone, we have completed the first section of the book on deed. Next year, we will be here, or another location. We'll be back in Park City. We'll study chapter 2, and our friend Aviva Galia Basima hopefully will be with us. And we will all study the section on creed, which is not as important, but without creed, without beliefs, all of these principles, if we don't believe in Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, God is one, then none of the deeds, there's a foundation of nothing. So creed is essential. Deed comes first, deed and creed, it's not creed and deed. Deed comes first, even learning, deed is most important. But creed is essential. Without it, we don't have a foundation for everything else. And next ski season, we will be studying it. I look forward to seeing all of you. Thank you.
You're terrific.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
Quick question for you.
Question?
Sorry, Jody. You said you can't just study all the time, you have to work. But what about the Issachar Zvulun relationship?
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up, Susan. The question is, there's an idea of 2 of the 12 tribes. One was really good at studying, one is really good at working, and they made a deal. You do the work and you pay for it. You pay for our lives, and you're good at studying. Let's be efficient. The guy who's efficient at work will work. The guy who's a big scholar will study. And there is truth to that idea. It's absolutely true that the person who paid for it and doesn't have the time to learn will get the benefit of the learning. Absolutely true. That doesn't mean that the one who pays for it is no longer obligated to study. He will get reward because he's toiling, he's giving his money from his work to support someone who studies. But as we learned, study is of no use without deed. So how can you perform deed without study? So even the one who is a good worker has to study so he knows how to behave. But there is a concept that you can study and receive compensation for it. But what we learned tonight is that is not the ideal, that you can't benefit from it. However, there's one exception. In the interest of time, I didn't go through every idea in this entire section. But one idea that's in here is not to misinterpret the words. You could read that and say, oh, well, a rabbi whose job is to teach people and all he does is study, or a woman who studies and teaches, and they make their living by teaching, that is different because they are working. They are contributing to society, right? God worked for 6 days and rested on the 7th. I know teachers work really hard. So don't confuse that with just somebody who studies. They're working, and they can be compensated for it. But the one who pays for it gets credit for the learning of the other, but that doesn't free him from the obligation to do some studying so that he can learn. Last chance to ask questions on tonight's class or any of the other previous classes. No? So one tradition that we have when we complete studying is we make a siyum. It's hard work. So we've got our l'chaim. So we do the work and we are supposed to celebrate it. And usually that's done when you complete a Mishnah or when you complete a Talmud. But we have completed a really significant amount of studying. And so therefore, the idea, right? So Could you imagine if you were at like a Christian class and they finished the class? All right, we're all going to drink now. No, but in the idea that we've been studying is that in Judaism we look for really good whiskey and we elevate it. We're not using this to escape from the world. We're using it to elevate, to reward ourselves, and we're elevating the whiskey by using it to celebrate our accomplishment for studying all of these weeks. So with that, I will say L'chaim, and we look forward to next year.
L'chaim, thank you
L'chaim.
very much.
And thanks to
for
Jody.
all of your work and preparation in delivering all of these amazing classes. It enriched all of our lives.
Thank you, Steve, and really thank you to Rabbi Benjamin Blech. I was just teaching his book.
Steve said it so nicely, but thank you to Pam and Jay for being audio video snacks. It was nice to have a break from providing all that myself. And thank you, Jeff, for spending all the time preparing. The Redbreast was a gift for him weeks ago as a thank you for hosting this class. It's one of his favorite whiskeys.
It is.
But so thank you to you for spending all the time. I know it's a lot of work to prepare a class. It's a lot of work to do any event, and it's a lot, even more work to prepare for a class. So thanks for doing that weekly for all of us. And I know the people who came enjoyed it, and people online. And the nice thing is that they've all been recorded. Thank you very much. So that way people can enjoy them, or I can listen to the ones I missed, or have my parents listen to them, or your friends. So
We look forward to having new people at our class next year, and we've got to have a place for them to go on YouTube. It's all on one playlist, and people can catch up when they have nothing to do when you can't ski. What else is there to do?
How can you find it on YouTube?
Jody puts it in her emails. I'm Jeff Steyer, S-T-I-E-R. Google Jeff Steyer Park City. It's the only thing I do here other than ski, and my skiing never makes YouTube, so thankfully.
I'll post them on my website so that way people can get them also. But anyway, so thank you for coming. Thanks for supporting, for all of you regulars, and thanks for all the guests that have come. And
Thank you,
thanks,
Jody,
Jeff.
for
Hi.
being
Hi.
here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So, I don't see.
We miss you, Steve.
Yeah, we miss you.
We miss you, Steve.
Come back.